Hi, welcome to the Kavya Learning Monthly Webinar. My name is Laura Riskus, and I'll be your host for the webinar today. Before we begin, I just want to start with a few directions to help you interact throughout the session. So first, you'll be using the chat panel on the right side. So if you'll see that on your right-hand side, use that to submit any of the questions that you have. So as you have questions throughout the session, please feel free to enter those questions. And our presenter has some polls for you throughout the webinar, so you can go ahead and use that as well to submit your answers to the polls. Since there's a lot of content to cover today, I'll review the questions that are specifically related to some of the material that our presenter will be covering today, and I will bring that to the last 15 minutes of the webinar so that our presenter can address those questions. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Kavya Learning Monthly Webinar, and we are covering program design, L&D's value to the learner and organization. Our presenter for today is Joey Marshall. Joey has worked in the learning and development field for over 25 years across a variety of industries. Joey combines an MBA and a bachelor's degree in electronic media to design and implement learning solutions that are innovative, engaging, and deliver maximum business value to organizations. Her experience and training allows her to think strategically about identifying creative approaches to help solve organizational challenges. So before we begin, we'll move to the next slide. I wanted to introduce Kavya Learning, just take a few moments to introduce Kavya Learning to you. Our passion is to empower L&D and deliver business value aligned to the greater organizational goals and become trusted members in strategic planning. Whether that is by skilling up L&D departments, providing services that fill a need for an organization, or others, we're looking to help increase performance. Our niche is within the learning and performance strategies and solutions, and we look to strategically partner with these organizations. Kavya provides a capability expertise in 4 core service areas to drive performance in organizations. It's learning technologies, learning and performance solutions, execution support, and you can see in the center strategic learning consulting. With strategic learning consulting, we're providing learning strategy, project planning, organizational development, and more. In learning and performance solutions, we have instructional design, curriculum architecture design, technical training, change management, and more. And last, within the learning technologies, we have e-learning, virtual training, LMS support, among others. And now I would like to go ahead and start the webinar and pass the presentation over to Joey. Joey, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks so much for that great introduction and sharing that information about Kavya Learning. I appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad to be with you today, and hopefully we can have an engaging session, an engaging webinar in regards to program design. So before I get into the content, I wanted to just level set about some terms so we're all on the same page. You can see those on the screen there. And so I'm going to use those terms throughout the webinar today, and hopefully these definitions will kind of give you some perspective and context for the content as we go forward. So let's go ahead. Let's jump into things. Here's our agenda for today's session. So first we're going to start out with what is program design and why we will use it. We'll also talk about learning and how that's a process. It's not just an event. We'll get into some program design considerations, things you want to keep in mind when thinking and implementing program design. And then I'm going to do my best to leave a little bit of time at the end for some Q&A, some questions and answers. As Laura said earlier, please throw your questions in the chat box. As we go through the webinar, she's going to keep tally on those, and then we can pop back to them at the end during that Q&A segment. So here we go. Let's jump into things. First thing, I would love to hear from you or see from you in the chat box. Please tell me how you would define holistic learning design. In the role that you're in L&D or learning and development, how would you define that? Go ahead and type your answers in the chat box now.
All right, Joey, I've got some answers coming in. One that takes into
Awesome.
consideration all the factors that impact the outcome before, during, and after training.
Excellent.
Let's see. We have learning design that keeps the learner in the center and addresses all of their learning needs through diverse formats.
Oh, good stuff.
Training that doesn't put my audience to sleep.
I
I like that
love
one.
it. I love it.
Content that encompasses all styles of learning and
Okay.
includes a variety of real-world context topics. Let's see, we got a bunch here.
Okay. Yeah, you guys are thinkers. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. One that says design that includes a variety of learning styles, variety of just-in-time moments and learning environments. And some people
Okay.
are talking
Okay.
about using the 7-20-10 model, and certainly
Okay.
reference to Major and Kirkpatrick.
Okay. Well, good stuff. That's great. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing and getting the dialogue going. So let's move along. When thinking about designing learning, it's important to design with a holistic perspective, something that incorporates a lot of what you just shared in the chat box. Holistic in regards to the learner as well as the organization. So what does the learner's learning path look like? Those parts are different for different audiences within the organization. And when thinking about holistic design, I like to consider how the learning paths connect and even intersect, providing comprehensive learning across the organization. So when planning and designing learning in our organizations, we need to think of the sum, not just the parts. Each part's important individually. Each part has its purpose and they're needed, but when they come together, they have a bigger impact. That bigger impact is what we're looking at with the program design. The whole creates something better. That, what the individual pieces are on their own, when they come together, it's bigger. The whole is bigger than those individual parts. So let's define program design. It isn't a one-off training request that comes to learning and development at the 11th hour. It is the big picture of learning at an organization. It includes the various audiences and their learning paths, the curricula, the learning objects within each. It is the all-encompassing plan and strategy around learning at an organization. So what does, when you're thinking about program design, what does it look like? What does learning look like from the 500,000-foot view? And how are the pieces connected across the curricula and across the audiences? So here on the slide is a really simple representation for what program design can look like. You can see collections or curricula of learning defined within different roles or types of content. So in the upper left-hand corner, you can see org culture there. That's a content area, a grouping of learning, a type of learning. You can see others in different areas, like the regulatory segment. We can also call that compliance training. But when looking at this simple snapshot, I want you to consider the current state as well as the future state and what the overall learning looks like for these curricula and the varying audiences that will intersect within. You can see represented by the blue and the white dotted boxes, for each of those curricula here, we have learning that is already in use, but we also have learning identified that's planned for future implementation, learning that will be designed and developed. Thinking about the big picture and long-term perspective will help to establish how these pieces all come together. And that will help with consistency in design, as well as with consistency for the learner. When using program design, learning and development creates a foundation for learning. Program design allows us to create a comprehensive plan of action for learning for the various learners across the organization. Future learning is built upon this foundation. Learning objects within the curricula can be used across the organization for the applicable audiences. Program design creates a sustainable, manageable framework for learning and development to build on. This allows layers of learning that are built on that foundation to shift depending on the overall plan and the needs for the organization and its learners. We need to think about designing learning for the longevity of the learner at the organization. Program design helps learning and development to avoid the Frankensteinish approach to learning for the organization. Frankensteinish learning is learning that is designed and developed in a vacuum without considering the connections for the learner or the content. One-off, ad hoc learning and training programs can create confusion for the learner and more work for L&D. Disjointed, barely connected learning can create discrepancies and confusion for the workforce. We'll touch on this a little bit more a little bit later on. So when using program design to create connected learning, this helps to build the credibility of L&D at the organization. Learning and development can move away from the order-taking method, a reactionary method, into a state of strategic planning with each department and the different business units. When the learning and development is in business conversations and not just the ones about a perceived training need, learning and development can position themselves for transformational conversations that help business units see the benefit, the breadth, and the depth of all that L&D can provide. These conversations lead to proactive dialogue about what learning should be at the organization and in those departments and business units, not the one-off training request enabling a reactionary response from L&D. So let's talk about some more details here. Thinking about the value of program design, when approaching learning from this higher perspective, there's lots of benefits for the organization. First and foremost, it supports the workforce. Program design creates a long-term vision for each learner's professional growth and how that growth can support the business. Program design also helps learning and development become a true partner to and with the organization's business units. As I said just earlier, conversations move away from one-off training requests and move into more planned and strategic conversations, proactive conversations, not reactionary ones. Those conversations create openings for learning possibilities within the organization for the different roles. And that bigger perspective helps gain us and solidify the learner's journey beyond just the initial onboarding that they experience, beyond their general day-to-day work. Program design also helps to sustain and maintain deliverables in a more efficient and effective way. L&D is no longer trying to retrofit learning objects. There's that Frankenstein stuff again. And it's putting things together in a more proactive, more holistic way. This helps to avoid that one-off ad hoc thing. This proactive view allows L&D to truly see those learning gaps, which may or may not align to proposed training requests. But then L&D is better prepared to service the business units because you have a better strategic perspective on what those business units need. Pieces within the overall program and curricula are designed more effectively as well. All right, so we've done a little bit of level setting with program design from a higher perspective. But let's talk about learning itself, the learning process. So again, in the chat box on your screen, I would love to hear your responses to this question. When you see that question, what do you think? How would you define learning as a process? Share your responses now, please.
We did have some interesting comments as you were talking, Joey. Somebody was talking about the fact that they feel like Ray Donovan always at the 11th hour with their magic training ointment that solves all the problems.
Excellent.
I think a lot of people can relate to that for sure.
Yeah,
let's see, learning which achieves the, the business objects. The 70-20-10 model fits here. It's taking what you learned and applying it and continued learning too. Let's see, Roy says, as with any business process, there's a series of steps, each of which can be improved. Kelly mentions awareness, experience, reflection, generalizing, applying, integration, certainly over time too. And Andy mentions that he thinks of spiraled curriculums as well.
Okay, excellent.
We got another one coming
Good perspective.
We've got, absolutely, a great active audience here. Arnold also mentions it means you shouldn't expect learning to be achieved after one event, which is very key, no question about it.
Love it, love it, love it. You guys are, this is good. You guys are all on the train with me. I love it. So excellent, Laura. Thank you for sharing. Thinking about that learning as a process, you know, thinking about learning as these intersections that learners will explore, and not just an event. It reinforces the learner's work, their impact on the organization and its success, and more. This is great. Okay, so let's keep going there. So when using program design, learning and development establishes a learning process mentality for its workforce. So we get away from those one-time events. We get away from learners thinking about learning as this one thing that's one and done. I went, I'm done, my participant guide goes in my file cabinet, and I do not need to touch it again. So we want effective learning for our workforce. Learning should be considered a lifelong process. Lifelong meaning their span at the organization, and regardless of whatever roles they may hold. So it's from the very first day on the job through all onboarding and beyond, and across, as I said, the various roles that they may encounter. So we want to make sure that they know that there will be intersections, there'll be touch points along the way, pauses and turns for the learner as they grow professionally within the organization. We need to think beyond day one for our learners and the organization, and how that mentality will benefit the organization overall. So onboarding is crucial. It's a really, really important part, and when it's done right, it can really drive that passion and engagement for your workforce as they start off at your organization. But when you have learning beyond the onboarding, you have that learning process established beyond their onboarding, they have more to look forward to. They're engaged. They're excited about learning. You have a learning culture mentality. Learning is a process at your organization, and it's along that lifelong path. Program design creates a clear path for learners and for their learning journey and ultimate growth at the organization. And this clear path acts as a vision for the long term for the learner and reinforces succession planning and enables bench strength. So what organization wouldn't want a workforce that stays on for more than 5 years, even in various roles? So we know that, you know, typically, or you hear, you know, various stats and things about how employees stay on for maybe 3 to 5 years, but does that have to be the case? Can we have learning as a process in an organization and reinforce that those workers stay on with us because they're engaged about the organization and the work that they do? In a recent article in a Harvard Business Review titled "Why People Really Quit Their Jobs," the authors identified the real reason why people leave organizations. The old adage is that people leave due to management, their manager, their supervisor. The authors used data gathered from the workforce at Facebook and used an engagement survey to track why employees left. Now, Facebook does have a solid effort in place to bring on and then develop their managers. Lots of support, lots of training, lots of development for them. Most of those managers who decided, or most of the employees who decided to leave, shared that it wasn't due to their manager. The authors shared in this article that they left when their job wasn't enjoyable. Their strengths weren't being used and they weren't growing in their careers. Professional growth for learners is valuable for them and of course for the organization. And why shouldn't it be? Knowing this drives the value of program design. So the article also dives into some of the concept of building roles for workers and how that helps to reinforce as well. But, you know, we can't ignore how important it is for people to experience growth within their careers. And we can't let go of how L&D can reinforce that and have a part in that. Okay, so let's go to some, let's get into some nuggets here. So to help explain some of this stuff further, we're going to look at these nuggets. So first of all, think of learning objects you already have in place. So learning objects meaning those one little learning element that you may have in place, like an instructor-led training, e-learning modules or courses, a virtual instructor-led session, microlearning or mobile learning elements like videos, just-in-time items like quick reference guides. And that's just scratching the surface on what's out there in regards to learning objects that each of your organizations contain. Each of those individual objects has its own purpose, but are all those separate objects connected? So when learning is disjointed or those learning objects aren't connected from a holistic perspective, learners walk away thinking and feeling that learning is a one-time event, after which they're done. So this can devalue the importance and the need for L&D as an organization. When using a program design approach, having connected learning objects, learners are engaged in learning from the start and at all turns. Learners see and understand connection points. They actually gain more from those learning objects as they are connected to other pieces. Reinforcement for their learning and the learning experiences is happening organically. So this helps reinforce the value of learning in general and the learner's overall growth at the organization. Okay, so to help illustrate how learning can be connected, those learning objects can be connected for a learner, here's an example of a learning plan. Now this is, it's just an example. You can see there's a variety of different types of learning objects there. They cross over different phases across the span for the learner. But it does illustrate how a learner will work through, from the beginning to the end, work through a specific curriculum, how and when they'll engage with the different and various learning objects. Learning plans show the learner the connectedness of the learning for that specific curriculum, their path. This representation could go even higher and show how, for a specific role, each of the individual curricula work together and are connected. In my experience, when designing a curriculum and its encompassing objects, it's important to also design a learning plan. The plan helps the learner know what they just encountered, what's coming, and more. And it provides guidance for the path that they will take. We all know that those learners, us adults, we want to know what's coming. We want to know what's ahead, and a learning plan will help with that. Okay, so let's move into our third segment, program design considerations. And hopefully some of these considerations will help you to start implementing that program design approach at your organization. So going back to our initial simple illustration of that big picture view for program design, we can start to identify the important elements to keep in mind. So when L&D is working through this, you really want to consider the types or topics for learning, such as the one shown here. So again, we have organizational culture, regulatory, and then you can see some specific training for different roles. So with program design, you really should be considering and planning learning from the top of the organization and work your way down and across. List the who, the what, and the when. Who will touch the learning? Who will consume the learning? What? What is the learning? How many objects does the learning entail? And when? When should the learner encounter the learning, the curriculum itself, and the individual objects? And then keep in mind that the when question may have different answers for the different audiences for the same learning object. And when considering all of these different pieces, you should really be prepared to look to the future state. Are there big initiatives coming that L&D should be prepared to support? This should be things like, or this could be things like operational changes, large product rollouts, specialized seasonal training, various things such as that. You should also consider what new roles will be added to the organization. This question is critical and helps to establish L&D as a forward-thinking support system to the organization. Also consider what new learning topics will be added to the existing types already in place. So some specific learning types or areas like product, knowledge, those are constantly shifting and ebbing and flowing, right? Because you are bringing in new products, you're eliminating products or discontinuing products. So that one's continually changing and ebbing and flowing. Others might be more static, but you always want to look for those opportunities. Learning and development should do all they can to answer these questions and start to paint the picture for the future state of training at the organization. And this helps to be considered a partner. You got to be forward thinking in regards to this. As L&D works to establish the framework for the program, The expandability of the design must be considered. You want to allow for the growth of the overall program, but also the curricula within. As you frame up what currently exists, identify those future training opportunities. Some of what we just talked about. Maybe there's a new role coming, a new product rollout, some new element to some compliance training that has to be pushed through. But you can see in the slide here that we have opportunities represented by the dotted boxes and breaks between objects for that expandable design. As you plan out future curricula and design for the overall program, think ahead for where the learning needs to grow and expand, for the learner by role and for the organization by type. This mentality will help establish a longer shelf life for the learning objects at your organization. It also lends to more effective and efficient maintenance of your curricula. You also want to consider consistency. Program design assists in building consistency across an organization's learning. When planning learning from the top down, a consistent message readily takes shape. This consistency helps the learner see and feel the connectedness across the learning, some of which we talked about earlier. Now, every single learning element doesn't need to look exactly the same. I don't recommend that, but there should be a consistent message across the organization and across all learning. And each role's learning should have its own element of consistency. It's important to think about the consistency for the experience for the learner. You don't want your learners to waste time and energy figuring out how and when to engage with learning objects. You want them to have a plan for the program and they know of the consistency. They can expect it about those connection points and the experience. And the learner in this regard will easily make sense of it and start to anticipate the next steps and the next turns. Another consideration is communicating a clear message for the organization around program design itself, as well as the different programs or curriculums that you'll be using. So beyond communicating this with L&D, so you should be doing it internally in your own department, it is critical to communicate this and your use of it across the organization. Don't wait for the other groups in your organization, for the other departments or business units to figure it out. Go tell them, start messaging it, tell them what you're doing, show them that you're forward thinking. With that messaging, you can also start to build relationships with key players in the different organizations and different departments. And in those relationships, as you start to build them, you can work to better understand their needs and plans, which you actually should be a part of anyway. It's an excuse to contact. It's a great way to reach out to the different business units. I really am a firm believer that L&D should market themselves throughout the organization to keep their services and value top of mind. In my opinion, every learning program, all curricula for learners, should have a communication plan built around it. So, do you recall the slide from earlier? So we talked quickly earlier about learning plans for the learner. At the top there in that orange box, you can see the communication points listed and identified at each phase of the learning. So you can see the communication actually starts before the learner has access or can dive into any of the actual learning objects. It doesn't have to be complex, a learning or a communication plan. It can be as simple as a collection of scheduled messages that are delivered via the right channel for your particular organization, for those learners, for that audience. Maybe it's emails. Maybe it's on your company bulletin board, or even other social media outlets that your company uses. The important part here is that the learner is informed as to what to expect for the learning journey in a consistent and clear manner. When leveraging a program design approach, the communications are easier to craft. Communications for L&D support program design when they're broad, when they're reaching the entire organization, explaining the overall value of learning development and the use of program design. They're consistent, using clear language around the who, what, where, why, and how. They're timely and relevant. They're timely and relevant for the recipient as well as to them, as well as the entire organization and the different audiences that intersect. And they are planned. They're showing that L&D has a plan and isn't reactionary. Learners should not be taken by surprise by messaging, but expect and use messaging to plan their own engagement with their learning. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff here that I just shared. A lot of it is very conceptual, but hopefully there's some things in this webinar that you can take back to your desk and implement. So I shared a variety of different elements around the topic, but you might be wondering, what can you do when you get back to your desk? So can you leap into this? Can you jump into program design? And my response is, of course you can. So here's a hot list of things that you can start doing right now. You can start by identifying all the audience groups within your organization. List them by role, list them by other categorizations. Seniority, maybe those that are pegged for leadership positions, the high potentials, others in new roles, whatever other categories that are relevant for you in regards to learning and the organization. Map out and catalog all the learning across your organization, all those different learning objects. Organize them by topic or content area. Identify the applicable audiences that would touch or consume them. Identify the creation date and the last time it was updated. And then identify any other criteria that could help with distinctions in that catalog. And then look for opportunities based on the current state, the existing gaps, the future state. All of this will start to help paint a picture for what you currently have, as well as what you may need and what's that low-hanging fruit you can start to attack next. And then, of course, again, I'm going to talk about communicating this with your organization about your plan. Create conversations with those in the business units about their needs as they perceive them. This will help you see where those connections happen and start to close the gaps. Okay, so that is the gist of it. So I'm going to go ahead and toss it back over to Laura for our Q&A portion. There's questions in the chat. I'm happy to address those now.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Joey. So if you haven't done so, go ahead and type your question in the chat if you have certainly any questions. I know Joey, she covered a lot of great information, so hopefully as you start to let it soak in a little. I do have a question, one question that came in, and specifically about actually the slide that you just presented. With the roles that change so often, what are other ways? I know you touched on this a little bit, Joey, but what are some other ways that you can organize your audience?
So that's good. So that's the slide you're talking about, Laura.
That's the slide.
So organizing,
yeah, one of them. Some of it.
Yeah, high potentials. You know, role. You know, you can define them by department. Obviously, you can also define them about how they might cross departments or how departments might support each other. That's another way. You can start to identify those that are like mentors. You know, like certain roles have great opportunities for those individuals to be mentors to others. And on the flip side, you can identify those mentees. You can also start to identify it according to the technical side, like what skills. Because there's certain roles that certain skills cross over, right?
Right.
Certain technical or software type skills, or maybe there's more critical thinking or those types of skills that cross over. And so you can start to categorize those roles, because what you may find is a learning object may not be specific to a role, but then it's specific to a skill. And you start to see how those learning objects and really what that starts to do when you catalog and you have this identifying kind of index, is you start to see how your learning objects have a longer shelf life, but also cross over. So you're not recreating. If you have a learning object that is specific for a technical skill, but it hits several audiences, you don't have to redo that learning object for different audiences. You just make it available to those different audiences. So L&D is being efficient and effective with their time, and they're being smart about how they're pushing learning out to the organization.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks. I have a question here. What advice do you give to a training department that is already overwhelmed with current workloads? Where should they start? You know, where do you give in on that one?
I know, and you know, I got to be honest with you, because as I was putting this content together, I was like, oh, this is a little bit of this is Shangri-La, I get the reality of what we're all facing, and a lot of us are in reactionary mode at times because we're working to service our organization. So I get that, but I do think one of the things that can start to happen when time is available is this cataloging and starting to identify what you currently have, because that will create the connection points. You'll see where your learning objects fall. But the other thing, the big thing that I would start doing is start to communicate about this. Like, you really want L&D to have a big picture influence and perspective across the organization. And if you're not communicating that out, the organization doesn't know that. So that is a big thing. And so some of us who might be in roles that may not have as much of an influence or touch point with those higher level roles or senior level executives, you can still plant seeds with those individuals that you intersect with within the organization and start to dialogue about, well, we're really looking at learning from a big picture perspective, and we really want to create learning that has longevity and really does service the organization from a whole. And you can start to dialogue those things and start to plant the seeds. So when you do get some traction and working through establishing program design, you start to have some support because people have heard you talk about it. It isn't a surprise. And people are like, oh, yeah, I heard Susie talk about program design a month ago, and look, they're starting to do it there. And so it starts to make those connections for people.
Okay, great. Thank you. And kind of on that note, Sarah had asked, she asked a question, and it's along the same lines, but there might be a little bit of a nuance here. In a massive matrixed organization with a culture of playing defense and sending last-minute training requests, how can L&D move away from this reactionary to the visionary? So I think you touched on a little bit of that, certainly in that answer.
Yes, and Sarah, I wrote a blog. The name of it is escaping me, but it touches on how you can use those last minute requests to start to change the shape and the viewpoint that the organization has for L&D. So yes, you should service them. Of course you should. You should be a valuable service to your organization. But in those conversations, you can start to dialogue and start to prepare, again, plant that seed for whoever you're working with. So you're identifying what they need, yesterday, and how fast you're going to work and how you're going to make it happen. But in that dialogue, you're also talking about, is there something connected to this that's coming that we can start working together on now versus having it be so last minute, because we want to support you. And so you start to create those or take advantage. You kind of hijack those opportunities from those last minute requests and start to initiate the dialogue about how L&D is a proactive partner, how you're strategic, how you're there to service them and support them for the long term, not just in the 11th hour. And so it isn't a flip of the switch. It is a cultural thing in regards to how some people respond. But when a business unit gets to experience L&D in a proactive way, then they feel it and they know it, and then they'll start to come to you sooner. So you have to kind of pave the road for them and start to create opportunities for them. In addition to that, L&D, beyond servicing what you're doing right now in front of you, L&D should be doing a regular, just seeking out what business units need. So I know, again, that's pie in the sky. It's hard because we're doing so much, but when you do have an opportunity, you're chatting with someone from a different business unit next to the coffee maker, or you pass by someone by the water cooler, it's a great opportunity for you to start dialoguing and saying, hey, how's it going? What are you seeing? Any training needs? How can I support you? What can I do? And think about it as that proactive servicing. And so when you're constantly planting that seed and messaging that, people pick up on it, and then they start to remember you.
That makes sense. Talk and shop helps, certainly. There's no doubt about that. So how do you look for opportunities in a business that feels that they don't need it? If a business says, I just give you the information and you just go make the training, and you want to have that more meaningful discussion, how can you start to approach that?
So coming from my consultant experience, it's bigger than throwing that direct question out. So I did say that, like, what training needs do you have? So you can start to talk in that way, but you want to start to talk broader as well. So you want to understand what they're experiencing, what they're going through, what aches and pains they have, and then as you decipher that and hear more, you can start to uncover the opportunities where you can come in and support and service them. And so some of it is just general dialogue. I mean, I'm a huge advocate for, like, that person in that business unit, take them out for coffee, sit them down, and just have a conversation and just talk about, like, what are you experiencing? What are you going through? And there'll be ways for you to identify where those opportunities are. So it doesn't have to be, tell me your training need immediately. It can be those casual conversations that build on. And then you start to hear what those aches and pains are. And that's where, L&D can come in and start to service.
Awesome, fantastic. I have another question here that I think is certainly probably on everybody's mind, but one question is, how can you give anyone have any guidance that they give SMEs about how long good training, unquote, and good training is in quotes, would really require? And I think this, it lends itself to, I know you talked about previously, was just, it's not the one and done, right? There's a lot of different, when you're providing a solution, there's a lot of different approaches. So how can you talk to your SMEs about that? Because I know a lot of organizations, SMEs kind of run the show.
Yeah, they do have influence. And so my first recommendation is to think of that SME as your partner, not as an obstacle, but as your partner. I can talk about 3 days straight about working with SMEs. I'm really passionate about that topic. So you want to partner with them. How can you support them? How can you better understand what makes them tick? How can you better understand what their needs are? So that's critical. But in regards to getting them to understand what quote unquote good training is, I think it depends. I hate to do that, but it really does depend on what the need is. And so in the dialogue, when they're sharing with you what they have identified is going to be the deliverable, because that happens, right? They come to us to tell us exactly what they want. In that dialogue, you can start to identify the good and bad. And I'm going to be honest with you, sometimes SMEs come with really good ideas. So I would always go to those conversations with an open mind and look for the good ideas. And if they're there, then take them. And that is only going to build the trust in the relationship with your SME. And then they're going to want to work with you more. But you need to dialogue with them in a way that isn't jargon based. We can't have conversations with other business units where we talk about how awesome our objectives are, and we talk about all this LMS stuff, because it's not their world, and so some of it just doesn't resonate with them. So we need to understand their language, and we need to talk with them in regards to that. And so as you're dialoguing with them and understanding what their training requirement or training need is, you can start to dialogue with them about what you really see as the better and the right solution for the learner. And you always want to back it up. Like, it's really best to do this kind of learning in a 15-minute segment because of ABC. My recommendation is to do this training as a job aid. You really don't need that to be a 30-minute e-learning, because it's just a process. We can have it easily accessible to the learner, and this will do A, B, and C for the learner. So you always want to explain. You always want to guide them and start to get them to understand. Now, again, that's not a flip of the switch, just like with the other one. So it's a constant and continual conversation with your SMEs, those in the other business units, so they can start to understand you are there to partner. You are there as a strategic advisor. You're there to support them. And eventually they will get to the place where they're trusting you. So sometimes you have to make concessions. Sometimes you just are like, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to do this 30-minute e-learning. I don't think it's the right thing, but for right now, this is what we're going to do. But we're going to work toward creating different quote unquote good learning as we go forward. So it's a process. It isn't just do it my way, because it's a relationship. You're working with people, and you need to establish those relationships and build that trust.
Yeah, that makes sense, certainly. I have a question. Do you have any suggestions for, and it's quick and easy measures that can be put into place to capture L&D's ROI? I think certainly a lot of groups are always challenged with that, and it's almost like getting some of those quick wins. What should we be measuring to feel like they're moving the needle when they're creating a learning culture?
So butts and seats is not enough. How awesome your lasagna was, or how comfy the chairs were, and the face-to-face learning, not doing it. And it's not building credibility for L&D. What you need to be doing is attacking your metrics to the business goals. So whatever business unit you're working with, you need to figure out what their business goal is. What is it? I mean, if it's sales, obviously it's higher revenue, it's increased revenue. So you need to attack your metric to that. And how can you have an impact on that metric? So it depends on your learning. It depends on what's needed and what the learning is. But when you start to connect your learning events, your learning process, the program, the different objects, when you connect those back to the business goals, that's when you're going to start to get eyes on you, when people are going to start to see that learning can have an impact. And it's an impact. You would never claim that you would own the increase in revenue, but you can have an impact on that. You can. Learning can do that. So you need to be distinct about what those business goals are. Have those conversations with the business units. What are your business goals? And then start to attack your metrics to that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is part of a whole. Certainly, you can't say it's
Yep.
absolutely 100%, but it is absolutely part of a whole.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's a discussion that is hard for people to get their arms around because they say, oh, well, this doesn't have a direct impact, but it absolutely, I certainly think, to your point, without it, then it would be less of an impact. And I think that's an important conversation, no doubt.
Yeah.
One of the questions really kind of had to do with microlearning. And when planning a curricula, performance improvement is dependent upon a change in behavior. Are you a proponent of microlearning for the performance pieces and overviews for the all audience pieces for things like value messaging?
Yeah, I think microlearning, and I'm going to be honest with you, that term is just floating around all over the place in our industry. And I do think there's a variety of definitions for microlearning. So, but I'll just kind of sum it up for my own self in that, it's a small snippet it's like a learning object in a small chunk. It could be like a 2-minute video. It could be some other kind of engagement through an e-learning. But anything over 10 minutes, no way, it's too long. But yes, microlearning can be super effective for those kinds of things, and I actually highly recommend it. We do a lot of videos embedding them into other deliverables, and those videos are of senior leadership, CEOs and things, talking about the vision for the organization. And who best to deliver that message than that person at the top? And so you can quickly deliver that message and replicate that particular micro element in different ways and have it kind of be consistent messaging across the different learning objects and curricula, depending on where it touches. So yes, it can. Sometimes it's not the right thing, but my bigger thing on what's the deliverable type is, what's the right way to deliver that particular content to the learner in their moment. And so your deliverable type, whether it's ILT, VILT, like virtual or microlearning or e-learning, that shouldn't be the first checkbox in your discussion with your stakeholder. That's later. Like, you need to understand the why, the what, the who, and then you define that deliverable type based on all those other criteria. So yes, microlearning can work, but it's not for everything. So don't shove everything in microlearning.
Right. Absolutely. I have a little bit more of a technical question. I'm not sure if this is a question that you can completely answer, but figured I'd give it a shot. Right. Was curious what software have you seen being used to organize programs, topics, object as per your slides?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it could be, there's There's a bunch of different ways. You know, obviously Excel is a way you can do it. You know, if you can create, if you got some tech savvy people on your team, or even you can get some support from a tech savvy group in your organization, you know, creating an Access database or some kind of a database would be great for you to catalog it all. You know, whatever I would think work. You know, we don't, you know, in our particular organization, we don't have anything specific currently that we're using, but I would think anything that helps you be able to sort through, find what you need, and then be able to make sense of it. I mean, in all honesty, like that, what's on the screen right now, that I would start doing that with Post-it notes. Find a big room, big wall, and start putting Post-it notes up, and put those audiences up, and start just dropping things down and starting to make sense of it. And then you can take that data back and you can start to populate it into something that's more efficient for future use and reference. So I don't have a specific software in mind, but I would think you could definitely get support from some other technical groups within your organization there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, because when you identify your audiences ahead of time, anytime that you're getting your content together and you want to organize the content, whether it be by topic or objects or, you know, to be able to pull it, I think what's most important is planning that ahead of time. So when you're identifying your audiences and your catalogs, those really become your tagging guidelines. And so then you can find them very easily. So to your point, it's, you really look at it from a database perspective, and that absolutely works. So absolutely.
Yeah. Good point, Laura.
No, I'm with you on this one. I'm with you. Performance certainly, and I think this is one of these kind of interesting items we talked about a little bit, but do you have any favorite impact measures or survey questions or techniques? I know surveys are always a challenge because people don't, you know, you always get such a small group that answers them, but I think what they're just trying to get to is how you can get some of that feedback that
and I think, and I'm assuming your surveys, we're talking like, you know, our evaluation, like our level 1 kind of responses to training objects and some of those opportunities. I love to ask the qualifying and quantifying. I like to do the question twice. And you don't do it with I don't always do it with everything, but especially like, what's the one, you know, the one word you would use to describe your experience with this particular training event, and then following it up immediately with a numbers-based one. So rate the following training event, and those help to kind of offset each other and create some stable metrics for you. And then there's all that dialogue about predictive analytics. You can start to put those into your evaluations and start to collect that data. I'm not going to speak to the specifics of it. I'm not deep in that content, but there's oodles of content out in our world about predictive analytics and how robust that data can be if you're asking those questions in the right way. So I think that those are definitely possible.
Yeah. What about levels 3 and 4?
Yeah, those are more complex. So you're just getting more complex when you get into the evaluation for levels 3 and 4, and you want to make sure what data do you want? What do you want from what data do you want from that particular training event that you can then parse that data, make sense of that data to then use to start to carry the message about the effectiveness and L&D at the organization. So I don't have any hot questions in my mind regarding or for level 3 or level 4, but it's knowing what you want. What do you want? What story are you looking to tell? Are you trying to tell that you're hitting that metric? Then craft your messaging there. You know, there's a lot of different ways for you to navigate that. So it's just a matter of what information do you want to collect.
Sure, that makes sense. I did have someone who mentioned a little bit about we talked a little bit about microlearning and taking it a level down into the micro elements when you chunk your content so that you can pull it out, you know, depending on the audience. So you've got a very general content, very general, and then you have audience specific, right? So that I think I think that's really helpful when you approach microlearning as a whole. Is there's many different ways that you can think about it, but chunking that information is key.
Yeah.
And again, we're going back to the audiences, right? If you know your audiences, that makes all of that a lot easier.
Yeah, and when you start to think about your learning objects as those chunks, you start to think about them like the Jenga blocks that you can pull in and out, and you can pull that block out and put it in or onto another stack, or maybe replicate it. I have a blog article, I think it was recently published, about reusable learning objects, and it's such a frame of mind that you're not creating an e-learning to be the one in, like, okay, this e-learning is about this topic, they're going to take it, and we're never going to use it again. No. How can you create that e-learning in a way that either in a whole or parts of it can be taken apart and be used in other opportunities, in other learning paths, other curricula, for other audiences? So to think about your learning objects in a broader way and not just that one and done, and that will increase your shelf life, that will allow for you to have some efficient designing happening in L&D, and you can get some longevity. And then you're not, recreating. You're not constantly like, I just did this topic, but I did it for that audience. Well, was there something in that other audience object that can be applied over here so you don't have to recreate the whole thing? Think about how you can reuse and recycle things.
Absolutely. One last question that I have here is talking about performance lending itself to roles, and we talked a little bit about this earlier. Yet job descriptions across a large organization may differ, certainly by region, by department. Can branches in curricula be efficient when it comes to maintenance? So when you have all of these variances, right, across regions or departments, when you have branches into all these different curricula, and then you have to maintain them, and you have to go back and review them, there are some challenges. What are some of the ways that you can think of, certainly, that can help to address that? Some of those challenges.
Totally. You can, that's like, you could have spaghetti behind the curtain, right? It could just get crazy if you're not paying attention to it. So cataloging and being a good steward of your catalog will be really helpful there, because you'll see where things already exist and then where those gaps are. So you can see where something else might be needed or something could be used elsewhere. So I think branching can work, but I think it's a matter of managing it and not allowing it to get haywire, and keeping a good steward of it. When you start to have lots of curricula and you start to have lots of pieces, you probably need to assign people to certain curricula. Susie's going to own curricula A, Bill will own curricula B, and so on. And that person will own that, and then they can be a good steward of it. But also we'll be communicating across the team to make sure that, if something from Bill's curricula crosses over to Susie's curricula, the connection points are happening and people are dialoguing about it. So you can have that understanding. So branching can happen. I think it could be used, but it's just managing it. It's staying ahead of it and maintaining it without it being out of control. And if you are actually, if you're thinking about the sustainability and the longevity of your learning objects, you should be having proactive conversations with your business units about your learning objects. You shouldn't be sitting there waiting for the learning objects to expire, so to speak. You should be in front of them proactively and saying, business unit, tell me, we have these different learning objects that touch your audience, your group. Where are we at with them? Do we need to update anything? And so that kind of proactive work helps to manage the maintenance. So maintenance isn't like, oh my God, I have to go do it. It's not oh, I forgot. It's a regular thing. It's flossing your teeth. That's what maintenance should be. You should be regularly in it, paying attention to it, because when you're doing that, having to update or change or rearrange things is much easier, because you've always been, you're very aware of what's going on, and it's not a mountain.
Yep, that's for sure. Well, Joey, thank you so much. And thank you to the audience today. Oh, you got the attendees. You guys were fantastic with your interaction and fantastic questions. So, Joey, thanks again. Really appreciate it. Joey, you
Yeah.
want to go over your contact information quickly?
Sure, on the screen. So if you want to grab I think the slides are going out after the webinar too, so you'll be able to get my contact info there. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can see my email address. I'm happy to continue the dialogue with anyone. And then at the bottom, you can see all the great channels for Kavya in general. I really do recommend checking out our blog. We have a lot of great articles on our blog, and you can find it directly from our website, kavya.com. I think that's it. Thanks so much, Laura. Thanks to everyone for the input and the questions. It's been a great dialogue, and I hope you all gained a couple things that will be helpful for you.
Absolutely, you bet. And we'll be, as Joey, as you mentioned, we'll be sending out a copy of the presentation to everybody who attended, and any other resources that you requested. Certainly, Joey, probably link to the blog would be great. And certainly reach out to Joey with any questions. And we'll also be sending you our webinar information for next month. So thank you very much, Joey.
Thanks.
Have a great day, everybody. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.